Hi folks, this is Donald. In this video I am going to be having a go at sketching a vintage camera. And not just any vintage camera, this is one of my uncle's old cameras from days gone by, and he is no longer around and I've been left with a bunch of old cameras, and I suddenly decided that I wanted to try and see if I could draw one. I love the way they look. It's such an old-fashioned thing to be looking at all the intricate little buttons and details, and I'm showing this entire drawing in real time, so if you would like to have a go at drawing it yourself, then you're very welcome to. I will provide the reference photo for you to download in the description, or if you just want to watch along and see how the drawing came together in real time, then you can also just do that. If you would like to try drawing this, you will only need 4 things: a pencil, an eraser, something to draw in, like a sketchbook, and a pen. It doesn't have to be a fancy pen. I've got a fountain pen that I'll be using, but any pen, even a biro, would be perfectly good for this. And as you can see, I have started out with a pencil sketch, a very rough outline of what I will be drawing in, just to give me some idea of where things will go before I have to start trying to work out where to place all the different bits and pieces that are on the camera. And when I'm putting together the initial sketch, what I'm trying to do is break down the camera into basic shapes. So I'm looking at where is a rectangle, where is a circle, where is a triangle, that kind of thing. Keep it really basic and simple, just to give me some guidance of where I'll be going next. And hopefully you can see the pencil clearly enough, but I've just got my hand held over it for a few moments so you can see it under the shadow, just so you can get a clearer idea of what it looks like. And I feel like that's enough of a pencil plan to get going with, so now we can jump into the ink drawing. Okay, so I've never drawn a subject like this before. I usually do street scenes and buildings and real world things that aren't just a single object. So this was quite a new subject for me to draw, but I tried to approach it in exactly the same way that I would draw a street scene. So basically what I was trying to do was draw things in the foreground, things that are nearest to me first, and then work my way backwards through the scene. So in this case, I decided that the plate that sits below the lens would be the right place to start because it's the closest thing to me. I can't just draw the whole plate though, because I'm trying to observe as closely as I can how the camera is constructed, and I can see that the back half of the plate at the bottom is not visible, so I can only draw what I can see, and all the way through that's what I'm trying to do, is draw what I can see. It's a great test in how well you can observe an object, and I really enjoyed doing this. It was such a different experience to sit and draw something in 3D that's right in front of me, because so often I draw from reference photos, and this is quite a different experience to draw something that's right in front of you. And I know if you do decide to give this a go, you would have to use the reference photo, or you could just use this as inspiration to try and draw a physical 3D object yourself. If you have some kind of interesting object that you could put in front of you and draw, it's quite a different experience to drawing from a reference photo. I quite enjoyed trying it out. So you can see from the speed that I'm drawing, I draw very slow, and I'm constantly stopping to look back at the reference photo and make sure I'm on the right track. And so once I'd drawn the main visible part of the base plate, I then moved on to looking at what might be next, and I decided that I would go for the sort of U-shaped plate that sticks up on the right hand side that holds the lens in place. Now, I'm not suggesting for a minute that this is easy. If you've never drawn a picture before, this might seem a little bit daunting, but all I would emphasize is I've never drawn anything like this before, and I'm not a highly experienced artist. I don't have 20 years drawing experience, and I don't have any art education whatsoever. I am purely just winging this and making it up as I go along and trying to figure out how to draw. So I do hope if you think that this is too complex for you to draw, that maybe because you've seen me doing it, and trust me, I had absolutely no idea how this was going to go. I just thought it would be fun to try it, see what happens. If it's rubbish, then well, probably have learned a few things about how to draw a subject like this, and then I can go back and draw it again, or there'll be things that I can learn from this drawing that I can apply to other drawings that might be similar that I do in future. So there's always positives to take no matter how a drawing turns out. So I would certainly say don't be afraid of making a complete mess of this. It might seem frustrating when you get a drawing or a sketch wrong, if it feels like you've made a mess, but in the long run it always helps, because there'll be some other drawing you'll be doing in future and it will help to have made the mistakes, because then you've got something to learn from. So again, on the left hand side, I've drawn the upside down U-shaped plate. It's a pity I don't know the technical names for all these, and that's despite the fact that I used to be a photographer, but I was never using cameras like this, so this is all pretty new to me. And in fairness, even if I was using these sorts of cameras, I'm not sure I would have known what the name of the upside down sticky up U-plate is, but hopefully you get the gist of what I'm talking about. And all the way through this, I'm just stopping, looking at the actual camera, working out what goes next, and then just taking it one line at a time, very slow and steady. So this sort of bendy, long metal strip that I've just drawn, I can see that you can see most of it, but not the very end. That's cut off by the other metal strip that's pointing up the way. So I just want to try and make sure that I'm drawing what I can see and not just making it up. And do be reassured that I did make a few mistakes in this. Not major mistakes, but enough that I had to go in and add little corrections. So I'm looking again, stopping, analysing what's next. This is to me what real drawing is about. It's figuring things out. It's not racing through it. And in the time-lapse videos that I often show of really long-winded drawings, it seems like it's so easy, but in reality I don't find it easy at all. I'm always having to stop and think about what comes next, and I don't see that as a chore. That's just part of what I really enjoy about the drawing process anyway. So I'm drawing the bendy metal strip on the left hand side of the camera, and this is where the pencil planning comes in really helpful, because if I hadn't done a pencil plan, and I have done drawings in the past where I've just gone straight in with the ink, but for something like this, if I tried to draw this without any pencil guides, I would have no idea really where to stop that metal strip. And I would have imagined that the chances of getting it right are much more difficult. The proportions of things will be wrong, the strips will be in the wrong place, the wrong length. Having that pencil guide means I know where roughly I'm going to be placing the lens and all the other objects around it, so then I know where to approximately stop that strip, and then I can draw in the lens in the right place in relation to where I've already done the metal strip on the left. So I do feel like the pencil sketch beforehand is quite important for a drawing like this, where I'm trying to be as accurate as I can. You will also notice that my lines are very wobbly. That's just my natural way of drawing. My hand is quite shaky, so that does come across in the drawing, but I don't mind that at all. That's just part of the beauty of hand drawing, as I always say. Getting some of the detail inside the metal strips was quite difficult here. There wasn't an awful lot of space to fit it in. Maybe I should have drawn that slightly wider to give me a little more room. I'm using an extra fine nib on this fountain pen. This is a Lamy Safari, so this is the smallest nib that they have. I do wonder if it might be even better to draw with a fine liner for a drawing like this, because you could use a much narrower one and it would give you a little more scope to fit in the tiny details that are maybe a little bit harder with a fountain pen. But I'm so used to drawing with fountain pens now, and they are really economical as well, which is important at the moment. So I'm quite happy to keep using fountain pens, and what it does give you is a nice bold line so you can see the drawing quite clearly. I'm also trying to make all the edges of every little object on that camera, I'm trying to make them three-dimensional. So I'm making sure to add the 3D edges so nothing looks flat, everything's a physical part of the camera. And that sort of thing does add time to your drawing, but I do think it's worth it because it looks so much better and more realistic once everything has come together. As I mentioned, this camera was my uncle's, and it's a well-travelled camera, in fact, because he didn't collect them as in buying old cameras. This was his at the time that these were being sold as new. And he had a whole collection of them, including stills cameras and cine cameras. And he would travel a lot with work. And this camera went to far-flung places like Africa. And he would be taking photographs, and we've got old cinema footage on some of his other cameras that he took in Africa. And this is why I wanted to draw this. It's got a real personal connection to my family, and because I was a photographer, I've got a connection there as well. And just the history of where this camera has been. I just love the fact that there are stories that this camera could tell and experiences that it's had, which are so much more interesting than if you were just randomly drawing a subject that you had no connection to. It feels like you're drawing a part of family history by drawing this. And I know if you draw this, then you'll be drawing a part of my family history, not your family history, but that's okay. You're very welcome to my family. So what I've just drawn in the top right, I am assuming is the little flash. I think I did draw it a little bit small compared to what it is in reality. It is a little bit bigger, but that's okay. You know, proportions are always going to be a little bit out. I think it would be difficult to get everything exactly perfect. And maybe that's something I could have drawn in pencil. First, I didn't do that. Maybe that would have been helpful, but I'm not overly worried about getting every single thing totally perfect. I'm just trying to make as good a stab at this as I possibly can, and that's good enough because the main thing for me was just to enjoy it, and that's the way I always approach my drawings. It's enjoyment first, accuracy second. Now this section on the right hand side is quite tricky because I'm trying to work out how to draw the right hand side without going too far that it blocks where the lens is going to have to go. And you've also got little knobs on the outside of the lens that stick beyond that main circle, so it's quite important to go slow and steady and just make sure that if you're drawing a whole circle that you don't go all the way around without checking, is there anything cutting across this that I need to make sure I draw in before I complete the whole of the circle. So now I had to go into the gamble of drawing the big circle that holds the lens. I was a bit hesitant when I was drawing that because I was thinking if I get the arc wrong, if I get the size of this wrong, it's going to throw out the whole drawing, and I felt that I had gone reasonably well up until this point. So you know that thing when you're drawing and you get to a point where you think, please don't mess up, please don't mess up. But we can't put that sort of pressure on ourselves. We have to try and be relaxed and just enjoy it without overthinking it and talking yourself into the idea that we're going to get this wrong. Because ultimately it doesn't matter that much. You can always draw it again if you make a mess. Or just accept the flaws as part of the experience. As I was drawing this, I was kind of imagining what it must have been like to build these, because presumably they were hand built. And you can imagine connecting all these little dials and knobs and making sure it all works. It's quite a feat of design. And it makes it far more interesting to draw than modern day cameras that are nothing like this intricate. And of course, most people these days are not even using cameras, they're just using their phone. This little dial was a bit of a tricky one at the top of the lens because it's got a little pointy part at the back, and I was finding it difficult to draw that as a 3D shape. I don't think I quite got it right. But come the end, when I started adding in all the details like the letters and the numbers that are all over it, then that helped it get to the point where it looked like it was a 3D object, albeit not totally accurate. It was better once I'd added in all the detail. And that does bring me back to the point I always say about not prejudging a drawing or a sketch. So often it feels like, oh, I've made a really big mistake there. How am I going to fix that? Or I might as well scrap this and start again because it doesn't look right. But I always try to complete my drawings and sketches and then decide afterwards whether it's any good or not or what I could have improved. Because so often when I'm drawing, it seems like something's gone wrong or maybe I should just start again. But then you get to the end and you think, oh, it's not so bad after all. So it is worth persisting. I also made a mistake with the way I was drawing this lens area. That was something I had to go in and fix. So there are more lines in there than there should be because I had to go and correct it. I should have drawn the two circles first, and then you can extend the tube that it's connected to, whereas I drew the tube part first and then the circles, and that was the wrong way to do it, so I didn't get that quite right. These are the sorts of mistakes you just learn to live with, and it's all part of the reality of learning to draw. I'm sure a highly experienced artist or drawer could sit and draw this perfectly with completely straight lines and no mistakes and all that, but I would say for most people this is going to be quite a difficult thing, and there's bound to be things that go wrong. So if you go in with that expectation, then you're probably less likely to get frustrated when it happens. So again, just adding little details like making that little plate below the lens three-dimensional, just an extra little line above it. Makes it look like a 3D object rather than a sticker. And then onto the outer circle that goes around the lens area. And behind that little jutty out bit, there's another sticky up bit, for want of better phrasing. And it's just trying to make sure that I draw all of these in before I go and draw the next circle around. Because once I've done the whole circle, I can't then go back in and add other things if they are cutting across, or at least I try not to. You can see I do spend a long time just sitting fiddling with tiny things, and it often does take quite a while to feel like you're getting somewhere, and then suddenly there'll be a moment where you'll have drawn enough that it does look like the thing you're hoping it would look like. But that's what happens when you draw in such a slow, methodical way. I am also putting a link to a more detailed, zoomed in photograph of the lens area with all the writing and the dials and the knobs, so that if you are having a go at drawing this, you can get a more close-up look at it if you want to know what all the numbers are and the lettering and all that sort of stuff. Because I could do that because it was right in front of me, I could see that quite clearly, but if you're looking at it from a photograph, sometimes it can be difficult to make out exactly everything that's on it. But I suppose you could just ignore the photograph altogether and just draw along what I'm doing. But for me, I think it's probably more helpful to maybe watch this. If you were thinking this is a good idea, watch it and then use the photo to do your own interpretation. But you're very welcome to try and copy what I'm doing, copy my mistakes. I don't know if this will be helpful to people, but I do know that people have said that they like seeing real-time drawings. It gives you a much better sense of what the experience of drawing the picture was actually like. So albeit this is slightly different to the sort of subjects that I have been drawing on this channel in the past. I hope at least it will be helpful or of interest to see how it all came together in real time. So now onto all the little knobs and objects that are sitting on the plate below the lens. And there's some kind of little turny dial thing, and then it's got a little tube attached to it that swoops around to the right hand side. I almost missed that, and this is what I always find interesting about drawing, whether it's a street scene or a close-up subject like this. The more you look at something, you start noticing things that you didn't notice at the start. And for me, that's one of the things that I really enjoy about drawing, is that when you do study something like this, you get really quite acquainted with it, and you're noticing things that you would never notice if you were just looking at it normally. You know, if you sit and draw a street scene, there will be so many things in that scene that you will notice that you would never notice if you were just walking along the street. You just don't pay attention to these things, but when you're drawing them, you do notice them, and it's something that has really captured my imagination in the time that I've been drawing, is noticing things that I would have missed. That section to the left of the lens that I've just had to extend up the way, that was because I had drawn it too short. So I've just drawn it a little bit taller and connected it. And because there's so many little bolts and lines, it doesn't look out of place. It doesn't actually look like a mistake, even though that's what it was. But again, that comes from the fact that you're having to estimate roughly where things are going to go. And then if something's not quite in the right place, then I'm just going to add in a bit more detail to correct it and get it to the right height of where it needed to be. I can then move on to the main body of the camera itself. And this is where I felt like I was starting to make progress and it was starting to look like the thing that I was hoping it would look like. Once I got that box in place, it started to look like a camera. I did have to make sure to stop though, because the concertina thing that sticks out does cut across the right hand side of the background boxy part, so I had to make sure to stop and not have the line cutting across. And there's a little metal connector just under the rim. And it's all these little details that I like. That's what makes it satisfying for me to draw, is finding all those little bits and pieces everywhere to draw in and being obsessive about trying to get it all. I never do, there's always something I miss, but I try to get as much of it as I can, no matter what kind of scene I'm drawing. So onto the accordion squeeze box type thing. I don't know what the technical term is, let's call it an accordion. And the hardest part about this is trying to get the angle of the accordion section right, because what I want to do is get it angled up in a way that it will look like it's disappearing into the box that will then be drawn in behind it. And despite all the complexities of drawing all the knobs and dials, I found this the hardest part. Surprisingly, I thought the dial area with all the knobs and buttons would be the hardest part, but this accordion area was the thing that gave me the most trouble, just because I found it very difficult to work out where I should be drawing the lines and how to make sure that I'm drawing the angle of each section correctly. But I just went with the principle of trying to make sure that each little section that I drew in was slightly wider on either side than the last one. And I only noticed this after I'd drawn the second one, is that it's going wider. And if I'd continue to draw it like I'd drawn the second one, then it would actually be getting narrower, or would be the same width all the way through. So then I had to add in an extra line there just to get it to the correct width. And ideally I would have noticed that before I'd completed that section, but that's okay. We make a mistake and we move on. So for the third one, I did go wider, and then once I completed that one, I thought, yeah, this looks a little bit better now. I wouldn't say it's perfectly accurate. What I was missing was the dips. I was only getting the upward part, so it looks like the dips are hidden. But that's okay, it just looks like it's a little bit more squashed up than it is on the actual camera. And it still sort of worked when I got to the end of drawing this section. I tried to make a few of the lines wavy as well, just to make it look like it's a natural cloth type product. I think it's leather actually, just to make it look natural rather than a solid, perfectly straight object. Another thing I could have done that I didn't do here was that the angle of the lines going across the top is maybe a little bit pointing to up the way. It should have been more horizontal than I drew it. Basically, it should be running parallel to the line that I've drawn at the top. And again, I only noticed this that the further I went up, that I was slightly out of alignment. So then I started to correct it the nearer I got to the top. And as you can see, even though it's not a totally perfect representation of the accordion section, it does still sort of look like it. And I think if I was to draw this again, I would take a slightly different approach to how I was drawing this section to try and get more of the impression of the waviness, the bumps up and down. But at least as I got to this section, I was able to get the impression that it was disappearing into the box, and that was kind of the effect that I was hoping to get. And once the drawing is complete, I think it does effectively capture the subject that I was trying to draw. It was just my interpretation of that subject. A good way to look at it, and a very fitting one, is that if you want an exact replica of something, then you take a photograph. And if you want an interpretation of something, then you draw the picture of it. So with the relief of that difficult area being out of the way, I can now get on to the slightly easier part of drawing the box that it all sits in. And because I've done the pencil marks, this does make it relatively easy to draw this section, at least compared to the rest of the drawing. On the right hand side of the camera, what you can barely make out is there's a little metal clip, and if you flip that up, that is the viewfinder. So I just wanted to add in that little detail, and I just thought I'd explain it in case it wasn't clear what it was I was drawing there. Now I can draw in the top part of the camera, and it has a slight curve to the top of it. And you can see how wobbly and wavy the lines are. But that's the way I like it. That's the character of hand drawing for me. And if you get those wobbles, then embrace them, is what I say. You're not trying to draw something that's going in a camera manual. This is an artistic interpretation of a camera. And so bring your own flair to it. Bring your own shaky hand or wobbly lines or however it is that you naturally draw. Make it your own fun thing because that's just your natural drawing style. It should be the thing that you embrace rather than getting frustrated by. And it took me a while to understand that. When I started drawing, I was listening to a lot of advice where people would tell you that there was a right way to draw and a wrong way to draw. And I was trying to fight against my natural instincts of how I wanted to draw pictures, and then I'm being told that that's not the right way. So I do think it's important to just draw in your own natural way and not worry about what other people do. There's definitely not a right or wrong way to do this. And drawing a subject like this for me is very different to what I would typically do. And yet it also feels exactly the same. I'm drawing in the same way. I am taking the same care and attention and time that I put into my street drawings. And I really enjoyed doing it. And I'm just wondering what other things I could maybe draw at home that could be studied from a physical object in front of me rather than a photograph. Because it is different working from photograph, and I'd like to maybe explore that more and see what else I can draw. Because the whole world of drawing to me is still fairly new, and each time I do a new thing, I think, oh, I want to do that. You probably have noticed this if you've been watching this channel for a while. It'll be so often when I will try something new, and then I will go, oh, I'd like to do this a bit more. But then I'll discover something else, and then I'll be like, oh, I want to do this instead. It's difficult to keep up with the number of different things that I've thought, oh, I want to draw this sort of thing now. But I really would like to draw from observation more subjects like this, objects that are maybe one object I could study and draw in detail rather than trying to draw a whole scene. The other advantage, of course, is that it does take an awful lot less time than trying to draw an entire street scene in incredible detail and then 6 hours later your hand's almost falling off. It also means I don't have to time-lapse it. It means I can share this with you in real time. So do let me know what you think of this if you would like to see more things like this. It's not urban sketching, and I know the channel is called Urban Sketchy, but it's the same technique and it's the same person drawing it. So I've drawn in the leather strap on the top, and I will go back in and add a bit of textural detail to make that look a bit more physical, because at the moment it still looks too see-through without any textural detail added to it. Then there's the kind of knob thing on the left hand side, and again when I'm drawing the vertical line that makes the left hand edge of the camera, I want to make sure that I stop and draw in the knob before I then complete the rest of the line. And again, just adding in the inserts into the objects like this just to make them look three-dimensional. So this was around the stage when I was starting to feel a slight sense of accomplishment at having drawn this and made it look not disastrous, and it does look like a camera. I don't think you could be under any illusions as to what this is, and that's my primary goal whenever I draw something, is at the end of it, is it going to look like the thing that I was trying to draw? And so really all that's left is to add in the texture details and the lettering and the numbers, just all the little details that make it look like an old-fashioned camera. So the first detail I'm adding in is the writing on the top, which says Iconia. I don't know exactly how old this camera is, but I do know that these sorts of cameras went out of fashion in the 1950s, so it's certainly pre-50s. And this specific camera model is the Zeiss Icon Iconia. What you won't be able to see from the photograph that I could see when I was drawing from observation, because the angle is very slightly different, is that there's a couple little bolts on top of the leather strap, so I drew those in. I did try to get the photograph as close as I possibly could to the angle that I was drawing at, but it was just marginally lower in the photograph. I think apart from the bolts on the top of the strap, everything you can see is the same as what I could see. So I just put in a few squiggles and scratch marks to add some texture to the leather. Of course, you could go and colour this all in afterwards, and that would make it slightly easier to distinguish the strap from the background. Maybe you could use a dark brown paint or marker pen, but I was quite happy, quite content to just leave this as an ink drawing. So now on to the detail on the plate below the lens. There's that bumpy little area, and then there's a little bit of embossed writing at the bottom of that plate. It's probably difficult to see under all the dust. These cameras were being stored in the loft, so that's why they're kind of dusty, and obviously just because of their age. But I think I should probably have them out on display. They're such nice objects just to look at. I'm surprised how well they've lasted. It just shows how well things were built in the olden days. I don't know if it still functions as a camera, mind you. I like adding in all these line type details. It does transform the base plate into something that looks like a hard physical object rather than something that is see-through. And then there's the letters on the bottom of the plate which says Zeiss icon. And then just some more lines. Same thing again to complete the rest of the base plate. And in the photograph, you can't really see the lines in that little section, but I did want to add them in because it just makes it look more convincing that that's part of the base plate, and it makes more visual sense even though you can't see it in real life because of the shadow. And again, just drawing in some more lines just to fill up the rest of the base plate. Now that the whole drawing is there, I can see that ideally I would have drawn the whole lens area bigger. It is a little bit small compared to the real camera, and the concertina section I would have drawn slightly differently as well. But it's good to look back on your drawings and see where would I have improved, what would I have done better next time. So the next thing I wanted to do was add a bit more textural detail, and there's a kind of leather textured finish to the outside of the camera, so I wanted to just add in little dots to give the impression of that. Such changed days now when everything would be made of plastic, yet here this is an all metal body with leather and metal. It's a very high quality build, and that's why it lasts so long, I guess, but the cost must have been astronomical. Lots and lots of little dots. It's the sort of thing I enjoy. Whiling away an afternoon drawing dots or bricks or anything on a scene where there is thousands of the same thing. That's what I really enjoy doing. You just get totally lost in it and switch off the brain for a little while. It's great fun. And then the same thing down the left hand side. Lots and lots of dots. So as I say, if you would like to have a go at drawing this, do feel free to download the photograph. The link is in the description for the full photograph and the close-up of the lens area. So between the two, you should be able to put it all together. And I always do that as well. I think I'm finished and then I go, nope, I think I can add in a few more dots. So again, I'm just studying the scene. Is there any more detail I've missed? And then looking at the lens section, I can see there's some little screws that I hadn't drawn in, and there's a little Zeiss logo on the right hand side. It's very little, so I just put in some squiggles for that. And then there's another circular line that I had missed. And then there's some writing, the branding. It's Zeiss on the left hand side, and then icon on the right, IKON. And then on that little dial, there are a few letters. I don't know what they mean, but I put them in, and that was what I was talking about earlier. I was struggling to make that look three-dimensional. It didn't look quite right, but once you put on the letters in the right angle, it did kind of make it look a bit better and a bit more accurate. And then below the lens, there are a series of numbers. And there are also some numbers on the insert of the lens, so I just drew a few random numbers. The writing is so small you can barely make it out, so I just put in some random numbers. I was still fiddling with that lens, trying to get it to look right, but that was about as good as I could do. That's the thing with ink, is once you've made a line that's wrong, it's very difficult to correct it. A bit of textural detail on the little stand that pops out. The metal's kind of slightly rusted, so I wanted to just add some texture there. And then a few more dots, because you can never have too many dots. And again, just looking back at the camera, studying it, have I missed anything? Is there any more detail I can add? And there's not much now. There does come a point where you have to just stop fiddling and let it go. But I think I was getting to that stage where I was happy with it. I was happy to leave it. So the only job left to do is to erase the pencil lines. And I'm using a Faber-Castell putty eraser to do that. It's a nice squishy eraser. It doesn't damage the paper and it doesn't leave any of the little bits that a normal eraser leaves behind. So it's ideal for drawings on lightweight paper such as this. This is a Leuchtturm 1917 sketchbook, which is a fantastic sketchbook to draw in, but the paper is quite thin. So a nice soft putty eraser is not going to tear up the paper. Overall, I was really quite pleased and surprised how this turned out. It's an awful lot better than I was expecting it to be, given that I've never drawn anything like this before. And I'm quite enthused to see what other kind of things I can draw that are like this. And although there are things that I would try to improve if I did it again, I am really chuffed that I managed to pull this off. And hopefully you'll get some inspiration to try this yourself, either with this particular camera or go and find an object and draw it, study it from observation right in front of you. I think in terms of learning how to draw, you will benefit an awful lot from doing this, because I certainly have. And I hope you found it helpful to watch this in real time if you've made it all the way to the end. Thanks so much for watching. And for more drawing and sketching inspiration like this, click on this video right here, and I will see you in the next one.